In the dead of night, inside a forgotten city diner, a single moment of terror was about to change 2 lives forever. For Eleanor Vance, a waitress drowning in debt and despair, it was just another Tuesday. For Alistair Finch, a reclusive billionaire worth more than most small countries, it was a test of humanity. When armed robbers stormed the quiet eatery, everyone else screamed, panicked, or froze. But Eleanor didn't. What she did under the barrel of a gun was so extraordinary, so profoundly calm, that the disguised billionaire watching from his corner booth knew he wasn't just seeing an act of bravery. He was witnessing a revelation, and his next move would ignite a firestorm that no one saw coming. The Silver Spoon diner hummed with the tired electric breath of a city that never fully slept. It was 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, a time that existed in a grey space between the dregs of one day and the promise of another. Outside, rain slicked the asphalt of Columbus Avenue, turning the neon sign's reflection into a bleeding watercolor of red and blue. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee, sizzling bacon grease, and the faint, sweet perfume of industrial-grade cleaner, fighting a losing battle against decades of existence. Eleanor Vance Ellie, to the few regulars who bothered to learn her name, moved with an economy of motion born from exhaustion. Her feet, cushioned in worn-out sneakers, ached with a deep, familiar pain. Every movement wiping a sticky patch of syrup from a vinyl countertop, refilling the salt shakers with a steady hand, checking the dregs of coffee in a pot, was a small act of defiance against the crushing weight of her life. She had been a different person once. Sergeant Vance of the U.S. Army Medical Corps, a woman who could triage a multi-casualty incident in the chaotic heart of a firefight, her hands steady her voice, a beacon of calm in a sea of terror. She'd seen the worst of humanity and responded with the best of it. But the wars ended for her at least, and the skills that saved lives in Kandahar didn't translate well to a resume in post-recession Cleveland. Now her battlefield was a mountain of medical bills for her mother's failing lungs and the ever-present threat of eviction notices. The calm remained, but it was no longer a tool of her trade. It was a shield, the only thing that kept her from shattering. At a corner booth tucked away in the shadows and shielded by a high back sat a man nobody noticed. He wore a faded Cleveland Guardians baseball cap, pulled low a plain grey hoodie, and jeans that had seen better days. He looked like any other late-night traveller or third-shift worker, killing time. He nursed a black coffee, his hands wrapped around the thick ceramic mug for warmth. No one would have ever guessed he was Alistair Finch. Alistair's world was one of sterile boardrooms, sanitized data, and the rarefied air of private jets. His name was a brand, a titan of logistics and data management, whose net worth was a number with too many commas for most people to comprehend. He had a penthouse overlooking Lake Erie that felt as personal as a hotel suite, and a staff that anticipated his needs before he knew them himself. He was utterly, profoundly alone. He came to places like the Silver Spoon, not for the food, which was passable at best, but for the anonymity. He came to watch the unvarnished flow of life, to remember what real people looked like when they weren't trying to sell him something or ask him for it. He'd sit for hours invisible, just another piece of the worn furniture. He had been watching the waitress Ellie for the better part of an hour. He was a student of systems of efficiency, and he recognized it in her. There was no wasted energy, no theatrical sighs or complaints. When a trucker at the counter had become belligerent over a perceived slight in his order, she hadn't risen to the bait. She'd simply listened, her gaze steady, and said, "Let me fix that for you." Her voice was low, and even cutting through his bluster with a quiet authority that instantly deflated him. He'd mumbled an apology a few minutes later, Alistair had seen CEOs with a fraction of her composure lose their tempers over smaller provocations. He found it fascinating. She wasn't just doing a job. She was managing a small, unpredictable ecosystem with a quiet grace that was as rare as it was captivating. He saw the faint lines of exhaustion etched around her eyes, the subtle tension in her jaw that a life of ease never produced. He felt a pang of something he couldn't name, not pity, but a kind of recognition. He too wore a mask of calm control, but his was forged in the fire of corporate takeovers, not in the crucible of genuine hardship. Ellie approached his table coffee pot in hand. "More coffee?" she asked. Her voice was exactly as he'd heard it before, calm, professional, with an undercurrent of weariness. "Please," Alistair said, sliding his mug forward. He kept his head down, his gaze on the dark liquid filling the cup. She poured with a steady hand. Not a drop spilled. "Anything else for you tonight?" "No, thank you. This is fine." She nodded and moved away, her attention already on the next task. For her, he was just another customer, another cup of coffee, another small transaction in a long night of them. For him, she was a puzzle. In his world, people were commodities, assets or liabilities. They were driven by ambition, greed, or fear. He couldn't figure out what drove her. It seemed to be something quieter, something more fundamental, something he thought no longer existed. He took a sip of the bitter coffee, the silence of the diner settling around him, a fragile peace before the coming storm. The peace shattered at 2:34 a.m. The diner's glass door flew open with a violent crash, slamming against the interior wall and rattling the bell above it into a frantic, discordant jingle. Two figures clad in black hoodies and ski masks burst into the room. One was tall and broad, moving with a tense, aggressive energy. He brandished a matte black handgun, sweeping it across the room in a practiced, menacing arc. The other was smaller, wiry, and practically vibrated with nervous tension. He held a crowbar, gripping it so tightly his knuckles were white. "Nobody move wallets and phones on the table now," the taller one barked. His voice was muffled, but loud, a raw sound that ripped through the diner's quiet hum. The effect was instantaneous. The belligerent trucker froze mid-bite, his fork clattering onto his plate. A young couple in a nearby booth let out stifled screams, the woman burying her face in her partner's chest. The short-order cook, a man named Sal, who had seen his share of trouble, immediately raised his hands, his face pale. From his corner booth, Alistair Finch's blood ran cold. His mind, accustomed to calculating risk and planning 3 steps ahead, went into overdrive. He instinctively assessed the threats. The leader was the primary danger, but the younger one with the crowbar was unpredictable, a live wire of fear. Alistair's hand subtly moved towards his pocket, where his phone and a direct line to his private security team resided. But he stopped. Any sudden movement could escalate the situation. He was trapped just like everyone else. He was no longer a billionaire. He was a target. But then he saw her. Ellie had been halfway to the kitchen with a stack of dirty plates. When the door crashed open, she didn't scream. She didn't drop the plates. She simply stopped, her body going utterly still. She turned her head slowly, her eyes clear and startlingly calm, taking in the scene. There was no panic in her gaze, only assessment. It was the look of a professional arriving at a crisis. The nervous one, the kid with the crowbar, spotted her first. "You get over here. Empty the register." He shrieked, his voice cracking with adrenaline. He took a hesitant step towards her. Ellie placed the stack of plates carefully on the nearest empty table. Every motion was deliberate, slow, and non-threatening. She raised her hands to shoulder-height palms open. "Okay," she said. Her voice was a low, steady anchor in the storm of rising panic. "I'm going to the register. No sudden moves. We'll get you the money." She wasn't speaking to the robbers as much as she was to the entire room, a subtle command to the other patrons to remain calm. Alistair watched, mesmerized. She wasn't acting out of fear or submission. She was taking control of the situation by surrendering to it. The taller robber with the gun pivoted towards her. "Hurry up, don't try anything stupid." "I won't," Ellie replied, her eyes locked on his. "I just want everyone to be safe." She began to walk slowly towards the counter. The younger robber, whose name was Leo, followed her, the crowbar held awkwardly in his hand. His eyes, visible through the holes in his mask, darted around the room wide with a mixture of terror and desperation. As Ellie reached the register, she fumbled with the key. Her hands were shaking now, a fine, barely perceptible tremor. It was the only sign of fear she betrayed. Alistair realized with a jolt that she wasn't fearless. She was simply managing her fear, pushing it down, refusing to let it command her. The cash drawer sprang open with a ding. It held maybe $200. It was the middle of the week, the dead of night. "That's it," the leader, Rick, snarled, striding closer. "You're lying. It's all there is," Ellie said, her voice still even. "It's a slow night." Suddenly the trucker, emboldened by a misplaced sense of machismo, started to rise from his stool. "Hey, why don't you just leave the lady alone?" "Sit down," Rick screamed, whirling and pointing the gun directly at the man's chest. The trucker fell back onto his stool as if he'd been punched. During that split second of distraction, Ellie's focus shifted to the younger robber, Leo. He was breathing heavily, almost hyperventilating. His gaze was fixed on the gun in his partner's hand. "Hey," Ellie said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Look at me." Leo's head snapped towards her. "Breathe," she said, making eye contact. "Just breathe, in and out. Slow." It was an insane thing to do. She was coaching the man who was robbing her on how to calm down. Alistair couldn't believe what he was seeing. This went beyond bravery into something else entirely. "Shut up!" Rick yelled, turning his attention back to her. He shoved the collected wallets into a canvas bag. "Let's go." But Leo was frozen, his breathing ragged. The crowbar felt impossibly heavy. He looked from Ellie's calm face to the terrified patrons, and a wave of nausea washed over him. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. "Rick," he stammered. "What? Let's move." As Rick turned to grab Leo's arm, his gun inadvertently swept across the room again. It passed over the young couple, and the woman let out a terrified sob. The sound seemed to break a spell. Leo flinched violently. In his panic, he stumbled backward, knocking into a small table. A glass of water tipped over, shattering on the linoleum floor. The sound of the breaking glass was like a gunshot in the tense silence. Leo jumped, and the crowbar slipped from his sweaty grasp, clattering to the floor. Rick spun around his weapon, now trained on his fumbling accomplice. "You idiot," he roared. In that moment of chaos, Ellie moved. It wasn't an attack. She took 2 quick, quiet steps to her right, positioning herself slightly between the gunman and the patrons. She bent down, not for the crowbar, but to check on the young woman who was now openly weeping. "It's okay," Ellie murmured, her voice carrying across the diner. "It's almost over. Just stay down." The act was so maternal, so deeply human and unexpected, that it stunned everyone, including the robbers. Rick looked from Ellie to his panicking partner, to the front door. He knew they had lost control. The sirens would be coming any second. "Forget it," he spat, grabbing the bag of wallets. He yanked Leo by the hoodie. "Come on." They scrambled out the door and vanished into the rain-swept night, leaving behind a shattered silence, a broken glass, and a diner full of people who had just witnessed something they would never forget. Ellie slowly stood up, her whole body finally succumbing to the tremors she'd held at bay. She leaned against the counter, taking a deep, shuddering breath. Her eyes closed for a second. Then she opened them, scanned the room, and her first words were not for herself. "Is everyone okay?" Alistair Finch slowly lowered his hands from where they'd been resting on the table. He had seen corporate warriors crumble under pressure. He had seen politicians wilt under scrutiny. He had never seen anything like the quiet, steely strength he had just witnessed in a waitress in a 24-hour diner. He knew, with an unshakable certainty, that his life had just intersected with someone extraordinary, and he was not the kind of man who let extraordinary pass him by. The aftermath was a blur of flashing blue and red lights painting the diner's interior in surreal, pulsing strokes. 2 police cruisers were parked haphazardly outside their radios, crackling with clipped professional jargon. Paramedics had arrived more as a precaution than a necessity, and were checking on the shaken patrons, offering blankets and calm words. Ellie moved through it all like a ghost. She gave her statement to a weary-looking detective named Chen, her voice a flat monotone as she recounted the events. She described the robbers, their heights, their builds, the panic in the younger one's voice, with a clinical precision that impressed the officer. She omitted her own role in de-escalating the situation, framing it as simple compliance. To her, what she did wasn't heroism. It was protocol, a deeply ingrained response to chaos. Alistair had also given a statement, a carefully edited version that offered a clear description of the perpetrators while keeping his own identity under wraps. He was Arthur Finn, a freelance writer, just another witness. Detective Chen, dealing with a dozen other cases, didn't look twice at the man in the worn-out baseball cap. Once the initial flurry of police activity subsided, and most of the patrons had been allowed to leave, a profound quiet fell over the Silver Spoon. Only Ellie Saul, the cook, and Alistair remained, along with 2 officers finishing up their report. Sal was trying to scrub a scuff mark off the floor where the crowbar had landed, a futile attempt to impose order on the memory of the chaos. Ellie was standing behind the counter, staring into the middle distance, her arms wrapped around herself. The adrenaline had long since fled, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. This was the crash, the part where the memories she worked so hard to keep buried threatened to surface: the dust, the screams, the metallic tang of blood. She focused on the squeak of Sal's cleaning brush, grounding herself in the here and now. "Miss Vance!" She looked up. The man from the corner booth, Arthur Finn, was standing in front of her. His baseball cap was still pulled low, but in the diner's harsh, fluorescent light, she could see his eyes more clearly. They were a startlingly sharp blue, intelligent and intense. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was different from what she'd expected. It was cultured and quiet, with a resonance that didn't match his scruffy appearance. Ellie gave a slight tired nod. "I'm fine. Can I help you with something?" The waitress mode was her default, setting an autopilot she could rely on when her own systems were failing. "You can—" he said, his gaze unwavering. "My name isn't Arthur Finn. It's Alistair Finch." The name hung in the air between them. Ellie's expression didn't change. The name meant nothing to her. She didn't read business magazines or follow the stock market. He could have said he was John Smith. Alistair saw the lack of recognition and was, for the first time in years, genuinely pleased. "It's not important who I am," he amended quickly. "What's important is what I saw you do tonight. That wasn't just courage, Miss Vance. That was leadership, a type of composure I have rarely seen." Ellie shifted uncomfortably. Praise felt foreign and undeserved. "I just didn't want anyone to get hurt." "You did more than that," Alistair insisted, taking a small step closer. You managed the situation. You controlled the emotional temperature of the room. You identified the weak link, the younger robber, and you spoke to his fear, not his aggression. In my world, we pay consultants millions of dollars to teach executives a watered-down version of what you just did instinctively. Ellie finally looked at him, a flicker of suspicion in her tired eyes. What world is that? Alistair allowed himself a small, wry smile. He reached into his pocket and pulled out not a wallet, but a slim black titanium card holder. He extracted a single card and placed it on the counter. It was stark white, with a simple, elegant logo of an interlocking F and a name, Alistair Finch, Chairman, Finch Enterprises. Below it was a private phone number. Ellie glanced at the card, then back at his face. The name still didn't register with the force he might have expected, but the title Chairman landed with a soft thud. This night was getting stranger by the minute. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Vance," he said, his tone shifting from observational to direct. "This job, this place, it's beneath you. Your talents are being wasted." Ellie's defenses went up instantly. She'd heard lines like this before, usually from men who wanted something she wasn't selling. "I'm not looking for a new job, Mr. Finch. I have responsibilities." "I'm aware that people have responsibilities," he said, his tone devoid of any condescension. "That's why my offer isn't for a handout. It's for a position. I am establishing a new philanthropic division within my company. A foundation. Its purpose will be to invest in community-based crisis response and intervention programs. I need someone to help lead it, someone who understands crisis not from a textbook, but from experience, someone with unshakable integrity and a level head." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I need someone like you." Ellie stared at him, bewildered. It felt like a dream, the kind of bizarre, nonsensical scenario that exhaustion and trauma can conjure. "You want to offer me a job because you saw me handle a robbery." "I want to offer you an interview," he clarified. "A conversation. Come to my office tomorrow. Let's talk. I'll pay you for your time, of course. $1,000 just for the meeting, whether you take the job or not." $1,000. The number echoed in the tired chambers of her mind. That was half of her mother's monthly oxygen supply. It was 2 months of late utility bills. It was a lifeline. But the skepticism, a hard-won shield from her time in the service and the years of struggle since, was strong. "This is crazy. You don't know anything about me." "I know the most important thing," Alistair replied, his voice soft but firm. "I know your character. The rest is just details on a resume. My assistant will call you in the morning to arrange a car. The number on that card is my direct line. If you have any doubts, call it." He nodded at her, a gesture of finality, and turned to leave. He paused at the door, looking back at her as she stood stunned behind the counter. "What you did tonight mattered, Miss Vance. I intend to make sure it continues to matter on a much larger scale." He walked out into the pre-dawn gloom, leaving Ellie alone in the humming silence of the diner. She looked down at the pristine white card resting on the sticky, worn-out counter. It seemed like a relic from another universe. $1,000 for a conversation. A job leading a foundation. It was too much, too fast, too unbelievable. It had to be a prank or a scam or the strange delusion of a rich eccentric. But as she picked up the card, the heavy, cool metal felt undeniably real in her hand, and for the first time in a very long time, a dangerous, unfamiliar emotion flickered within her, a tiny spark of hope. The car that arrived the next afternoon was a silent black leviathan of German engineering. It purred to a stop outside her crumbling apartment building, its polished exterior reflecting the grey, overcast Cleveland sky. Ellie dressed in the only professional outfit she owned, a pair of black slacks and a simple blouse she'd bought at a thrift store years ago, felt a profound sense of dislocation as the driver, a man in a crisp suit, held the door open for her. The interior of the car smelled of clean leather and quiet money. It was a world away from the rattling city bus she took to the diner every night. As the vehicle glided through traffic, Ellie watched her neighborhood with its cracked sidewalks, boarded-up storefronts, and faded dreams recede in the rearview mirror. They were heading downtown towards the gleaming glass and steel towers that scraped the clouds, a part of the city she rarely had reason to visit. Finch Tower was less a building and more a statement. It rose 50 stories, a sheer cliff of dark, reflective glass that seemed to absorb the light around it. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and chrome, vast and echoing. A security guard with an earpiece checked her name against a list, and a moment later, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her late 20s appeared. "Miss Vance, I'm Clara, Mr. Finch's executive assistant. He's expecting you. Right this way." Clara led her to a private elevator that moved with unnerving speed and silence. The doors opened directly into the penthouse office. The room was larger than Ellie's entire apartment. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a panoramic, godlike view of the city and the vast, grey expanse of Lake Erie. The furniture was minimalist and modern, the art on the walls abstract and expensive. There was no clutter, no stray papers, no sign of human messiness. It was as immaculate and intimidating as the man who stood looking out the window, his back to her. Alistair Finch turned around. Gone was the disguise of the weary night owl. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his greying hair was neatly styled, and his face, clean-shaven, revealed the sharp, intelligent features of a man accustomed to command. He looked every inch the billionaire titan of industry. "Miss Vance, thank you for coming," he said, his voice the same, yet different in this context, amplified by the power of the room. He gestured to one of 2 leather chairs positioned in front of his massive mahogany desk. "Please have a seat." Ellie sat on the edge of the chair, her back straight, her hands clasped in her lap. It felt like an interrogation room. Alistair sat opposite her, not behind his desk, but in the other chair, a deliberate choice to reduce the power imbalance. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. "I imagine you have questions," he began. "A few." Ellie admitted, her voice steady, despite the tremor of anxiety in her stomach. "Is this a real job offer?" "It is," he confirmed. "But as I said, this is a conversation first. I told you what I saw in you. Now I need to understand why. Your file is sparse." Clara had placed a thin folder on the corner of the desk. Ellie stiffened. "You ran a background check on me." "Of course," Alistair said without apology. "I'm not reckless. I know you were born in Akron. Your father was a steel worker, and he passed away 10 years ago. I know your mother, Helen Vance, suffers from severe chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. I know your service record is exemplary and sealed under a provision I haven't seen before. And I know that despite working 60 hours a week, you're on the verge of bankruptcy due to her medical expenses. What I don't know is the person behind those facts." The clinical recitation of her struggles felt like a violation. A hot flash of anger rose in her chest, but she pushed it down. This was his world, his rules. Information was currency. "What do you want to know?" she asked, her tone cool. "Last night," he said, his blue eyes locking onto hers. That level of calm under fire. Where does it come from? It wasn't the reaction of a waitress. Ellie hesitated. She hadn't spoken of her time in Afghanistan in years. The memories were compartmentalized, locked away in a box she never opened. But his question was direct. and his gaze was analytical, not morbidly curious. He wasn't asking for a war story. He was asking for data. "I was a combat medic," she said finally, the words tasting like rust. "Sergeant 101st Airborne Division. I did 2 tours." Alistair's expression didn't change, but a new level of understanding dawned in his eyes. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. "Triage," he said more to himself than to her. "Threat assessment, de-escalation, that's what I saw. We were trained to bring calm to chaos." Ellie explained, her voice gaining a bit of its old authority. "Panic is contagious. If you panic, your patient dies. If you panic, your unit is at risk. You learn to breathe, to focus on the task in front of you, to filter out the noise. Last night, the noise was just different." "And the boy?" Alistair pressed. "The younger robber. You spoke to him. Why?" "He was the variable," she answered immediately. "The leader was a professional, predictable. He wanted money and he would follow a script. The kid was terrified. Scared people are unpredictable. They make mistakes. I saw his breathing, the way he held the crowbar. He was a bigger threat to everyone in that room than the man with the gun. Calming him down was the priority." Alistair leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. It wasn't a smile of warmth, but of satisfaction, like a mathematician who had just solved a complex equation. "Extraordinary," he murmured. "So I was right." He stood up and walked to his desk, picking up the folder. "Miss Vance, Eleanor, I'm not just starting a foundation. I'm trying to change the way my company interacts with the world. For 30 years, I've been a disruptor. I've streamlined supply chains, optimized data, and in the process, my company has rendered certain jobs obsolete. We've closed factories, automated warehouses. We've created wealth, but we've also created vacuums." He looked out the window at the sprawling city. "I've come to believe that my greatest legacy can't be a number in a bank account. It has to be something more. This foundation, the Finch Initiative, will be my answer. Its mission is to go into communities impacted by economic disruption and fund programs that work. Not handouts, real on-the-ground solutions for retraining mental health and crisis support." He turned back to her. "I have analysts and accountants. I have people who can write checks. I don't have anyone who understands the human element of a crisis. I don't have anyone who has actually stood in the middle of one and made things better." He opened the folder and took out a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the desk towards her. It was a formal offer of employment. Position: Director of Field Operations, the Finch Initiative. Salary $250,000 per year. Benefits: full medical and dental for you and your designated family member. Housing stipend. Company car. Ellie stared at the paper, her vision blurring. The numbers seemed to swim before her eyes. It was an impossible sum, a figure from another reality. Full medical for her mother. The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. It meant no more choosing between medication and rent. It meant proper care, better doctors, maybe even more time. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion she couldn't suppress. "You could hire anyone. Someone with a PhD, with non-profit experience. I don't want someone who studied crisis." "Eleanor," Alistair said, his voice softening for the first time. "I want someone who has survived it. I want the person I saw in that diner. I want her judgment, her calm, her instinct. The PhDs can write the reports. You will tell me what's real." He tapped the paper. "The job is yours if you want it. You'd answer directly to me. Your first task would be to build a team and identify the first community we'll partner with. The hours will be long, the work will be difficult." But I promise you, you will never have to worry about money again. And you will be doing the work you were trained to do, bringing calm to chaos." Ellie looked from the offer letter to the man standing before her. For years she had been defined by what she had lost: her career, her purpose, her hope. She had been living in the past, a ghost, haunted by the sergeant she used to be. Alistair Finch wasn't just offering her a job. He was offering her a way back, a chance to be that person again, not with a rifle in her hands, but with resources that could change thousands of lives. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden. She didn't wipe them away. For the first time, they weren't tears of grief or despair. They were tears of a dam breaking, letting in a terrifying, brilliant light. She took a deep breath, the first one that didn't feel constricted by anxiety in years. "Okay, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice clear and strong. "When do I start?" The story broke a week later. It wasn't Alistair or Ellie who leaked it. It was a short, grainy cell phone video, filmed by the young man from the couple's booth in the diner. He had sold it to a local news station for $500. The 20-second clip was shaky and poorly lit, but it was damningly clear. It showed the exact moment Ellie calmed the younger robber, her quiet words just barely audible over a woman's sobs. The clip ended as the robbers fled. The local news ran it as a local hero segment. By morning, it was on national news. By noon, it was viral. The internet, in its insatiable hunger for simple, powerful narratives, latched onto the story with a frenzy. Diner Hero was trending worldwide. News outlets, bloggers, and influencers spun their own versions. The narrative quickly became, "Brave down on her luck waitress, stands up to armed robbers." Then, a disgruntled former employee of Finch Enterprises connected the dots. They tipped off a major online news portal that Alistair Finch had been in the diner and had subsequently hired the waitress. The story exploded. The narrative morphed again. Reclusive billionaire Alistair Finch rewards hero waitress with dream job. Overnight, Eleanor Vance became a public figure. Her face was everywhere. Reporters camped outside her apartment building. Old acquaintances she hadn't spoken to in a decade suddenly called, professing their lifelong friendship and asking for loans. Distant cousins emerged from the woodwork, claiming a piece of her newfound fortune. Her life, once small and intensely private, was now public property, picked over and judged by millions of strangers. The public reaction was a tidal wave of both adoration and deep, biting cynicism. For every person who hailed her as a hero, there was another who called her a fraud. Anonymous commenters accused her of being in on the robbery, suggesting it was a setup to get a payday. Others decried Alistair's actions as a cynical PR stunt, a billionaire's cheap attempt to buy good press, and a pet project he could parade around. "It's a classic poverty porn narrative," one influential blogger wrote. "The benevolent billionaire swooping in to save the noble poor. It's not a solution. It's a symptom of a broken system where a person's worth is determined by a viral moment." The backlash hit Ellie harder than the robbery itself. The violence of that night had been straightforward, a physical threat she was trained to handle. This was different. It was an assault on her character, a twisting of her intentions. She had accepted the job to do good work, to care for her mother, to find purpose again. Now the world was telling her she was either a con artist or a pawn. She holed up in the corporate apartment Alistair had arranged for her, the blinds drawn, ignoring the constant buzzing of her new phone. The sense of hope she had felt in his office was rapidly being eroded by a familiar tide of anxiety. Alistair was furious. He was a man who controlled his environment, his image, his data. He had wanted the Finch initiative to launch on his own terms with a carefully planned strategy. He hadn't wanted its first public introduction to be a maelstrom of gossip and speculation, centered on its new director. He called an emergency meeting in his office. Ellie sat at the vast conference table, looking small and overwhelmed. Also present were Alistair's head of PR, a slick, fast-talking man named Julian, and his chief legal counsel. "We need to get ahead of this," Julian said, pacing in front of the window. "We'll issue a press release. We frame it as a story of corporate responsibility. Alistair saw potential, he invested in it. We can book Ellie for a morning show interview. Keep it soft, human interest. Let her tell her story." Ellie flinched. The thought of sitting under bright lights, answering invasive questions from a smiling host, made her feel physically ill. "No," Alistair said flatly. Julian stopped pacing. "Alistair, we're losing control of the narrative. People are calling this a stunt. And putting Miss Vance on television like a prize pony will convince them otherwise." Alistair shot back, his voice dangerously quiet. "It will only confirm their suspicions. This isn't about PR. This is about the integrity of the initiative." He turned to Ellie, his expression softening. "Eleanor, I apologize. I exposed you to this. It was not my intention." "It's not your fault," Ellie said, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to handle this. In the army, your reputation is based on your actions, on what your unit knows about you. This is millions of people who know nothing about me deciding who I am." "Then we must show them," Alistair said, a new resolve in his tone. He looked at Julian. "Cancel any thought of a media tour. We are not issuing a statement defending ourselves. We are going to issue a statement of intent, a full-page ad in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. It will announce the official launch of the Finch Initiative. It will detail our mission, and it will name Eleanor Vance as the Director of Field Operations, citing her years of service as an Army medic and her unique qualifications in crisis management. We will define her by her whole life, not by one 20-second video clip." He looked back at Ellie. "And then we get to work. The best rebuttal to their cynicism is not words, but results. We will let the work speak for itself." There was a fire in his eyes that Ellie hadn't seen before the fierce, competitive spirit that had built his empire. He wasn't just defending her. He was fighting back, using the tools he knew best: capital strategy and overwhelming force. A fragile sense of relief washed over Ellie. He wasn't going to feed her to the wolves. He was shielding her. He was treating her not as a symbol, but as a colleague. "What's our first step?" she asked, her voice a little stronger. "Our first step," Alistair said, a grim smile on his face, "is to find our first project. A town that has been forgotten. A community that the viral news cycle will never care about. We're going to go where the cameras aren't, and we are going to prove them all wrong." The decision was a turning point. It solidified their partnership, transforming it from a strange circumstance into a shared mission. They were no longer just a billionaire and a waitress. They were allies against a world that was determined to misunderstand them. But even as they planned their next move, an unseen ripple from that night in the diner was already making its way towards them, threatening to reveal a connection that was far more personal and far more damaging than any viral video. While Alistair and Ellie were weathering the storm of public opinion, the Cleveland Police Department was doing its job. 2 days after the full-page ads ran in the national papers, Detective Chen called Alistair's office. They had made an arrest. They had found the younger robber, Leo. His real name was Leo Kowalski. He was 19 years old. They had picked him up trying to sell a stolen phone, one of the phones from the diner at a pawn shop. He had confessed to everything, immediately weeping with a mixture of guilt and relief. His accomplice and older brother Rick was still at large. The news was a quiet victory, but it was a detail buried deep in Leo's file that sent a shock wave through Finch Tower. Leo's father, Stan Kowalski, was a former employee of a steel plant in Warren, Ohio, a plant that had been acquired and subsequently shut down 5 years prior by a subsidiary of Finch Enterprises. When Clara brought Alistair the file, he read it and then read it again. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones. He remembered the acquisition. It had been a strategic move, a consolidation of assets. The Warren plant was old, inefficient, and bleeding money. Closing it had been a logical, financially sound decision, signed off on by Alistair himself from the comfort of his penthouse office. The closure had resulted in the loss of over 800 jobs, a number on a spreadsheet, a line item in a quarterly report. Now that number had a face. It was the terrified face of the boy in the diner, the boy his new director had so expertly calmed. The robbery wasn't a random act of violence that had coincidentally intersected with his life. It was a direct, albeit unknown, consequence of it. He had signed a paper 5 years ago, and that signature had led through a long and tragic chain of events to a gun being pointed at him in a diner. He called Ellie into his office. He didn't hide the information. He laid the file on the desk between them. "You need to see this," he said, his voice heavy. Ellie read the report. She saw the name Stan Kowalski and the connection to Finch Enterprises. She looked up at Alistair, her expression unreadable. She wasn't angry. She wasn't accusatory. Her eyes held the familiar, steady calm of a medic assessing a new wound. "The father lost his job," she stated, piecing it together. "The family lost their income, their insurance. The son gets desperate. It's not an excuse, but it's a reason." "I did this," Alistair said the words, feeling like ash in his mouth. He walked to the window, unable to meet her gaze. "I signed the order. I destroyed that family. I created the circumstances that led that boy to point a weapon at you." The weight of it was crushing. For years he had operated at a 30,000-foot view, dealing in abstractions in market forces and shareholder value. He'd never allowed himself to think about the individual lives churning in the gears of his vast machine. He had preached a gospel of efficiency and disruption, ignoring the disrupted. The boy Leo Kowalski was the ghost of his business past, come back to haunt him. "You didn't put a crowbar in his hand," Ellie said, quietly from behind him. He made a choice. But the choice was made from a place of desperation. We see it all the time in the service. Good kids in bad situations making one wrong turn. Alistair turned back to her, his face etched with a turmoil she had never seen there. The mask of the unshakable billionaire was gone. In its place was a man confronting a profound moral failure. "What do we do, Eleanor?" It was the first time he had asked her for guidance, a true admission of partnership. Ellie stood up and walked to the desk, tapping the file. "This is where we start," she said, her voice filled with a new, firm purpose. "This is our first project, Warren, Ohio." Alistair stared at her. "Go back to the place my company gutted. The press would have a field day. They'll say it's conscience money, a publicity stunt of the highest order." "Let them," Ellie said, her eyes flashing with the fire he had seen in her during the robbery. "You told me we let the work speak for itself. This isn't about the press. This is about the mission. Your company created a vacuum there. The Finch Initiative is supposed to fill vacuums. What better place to prove it works?" She leaned forward, her conviction palpable. "And it starts with the family. I want to see them. I want to talk to them." "The Kowalskis." Alistair was aghast. "Eleanor, you were their son's victim. What could you possibly say to them?" "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I know we can't fix a community if we can't even face one family. You wanted someone who understands the human element of crisis. This is it. It's messy, it's personal, and it's complicated. But we can't look away. Her logic was irrefutable. It was also terrifying. It was one thing to write a check from a distance. It was another to walk into the home of a family your business decisions had helped to ruin and offer help. A few days later, Ellie drove a modest company sedan to a small rundown house on the outskirts of Warren. Alistair did not come with her. They both agreed her first visit should be alone. She knocked on the peeling paint of the front door. A woman with weary eyes and grey-streaked hair opened it. She was Stan Kowalski's wife, Leo's mother. Ellie introduced herself not as a victim from the diner, but as a representative from a new community initiative. She spent 2 hours in their cramped, dimly lit living room, listening. She listened to Mrs. Kowalski talk about her husband, Stan, a proud man who had never recovered from the humiliation of losing the only job he'd ever known. He was now working part-time at a hardware store for a fraction of his former pay. She talked about Leo, a good boy, who fell in with the wrong crowd after dropping out of community college because they could no longer afford it. She spoke of the medical bills piling up, the constant fear, the slow-motion collapse of their lives. Ellie didn't make grand promises. She didn't offer a blank check. She offered specifics. She told them about a legal aid program the initiative could fund to ensure Leo got a fair defense, focusing on rehabilitation over punishment. She talked about a top-tier retraining program for Stan to give him skills for the modern manufacturing world, and she spoke of a grant to help them catch up on the bills that were drowning them. There were tears, there was suspicion, but mostly there was a profound sense of shock that someone had shown up at all, that after 5 years of being invisible, someone was finally seeing them. When Ellie left that house, she knew they had found their mission. It wasn't just about charity. It was about atonement. It was about confronting the ghosts of the past, and instead of running from them, helping them find peace. The viral video had shown the world her reaction to a crisis. This quiet, difficult conversation was her first real act in her new role, the first ripple of a new kind. The work in Warren, Ohio became the crucible for the Finch Initiative. It was grueling, unglamorous, and far from the glare of the viral media storm that had long since moved on. Ellie was in her element, operating not as a distant director, but as a field commander. She set up a small office in a defunct storefront and spent her days on the ground, holding town halls in church basements, listening to the anger and despair of the community. Her profound calm, once a shield in a crisis, became a bridge, earning the trust of people who had been forgotten for years. Alistair, in turn, underwent a quiet transformation. He shed his corporate armor, flying commercial, and walking the town's cracked sidewalks. He sat in the back of Ellie's meetings, a silent witness to the human consequences of the numbers on his old spreadsheets. He became her operational partner, applying his logistical genius not to maximize profit, but to remove obstacles. When Ellie identified a need for a vocational tech program or affordable childcare, Alistair leveraged his vast network and resources to make it happen swiftly and without fanfare. Their first quietest victory was the Kowalski family. With the initiative's legal aid, Leo received rehabilitation instead of prison time. His father, Stan, enrolled in the new advanced manufacturing program and graduated at the top of his class, securing a job with a future. It was a single family made whole, a testament to their mission of targeted, human-centric repair. 6 months later, Alistair joined Ellie on a park bench overlooking Warren's slowly reviving Main Street. A local paper had just run a story on the initiative's success, quoting a hopeful Stan Kowalski. "That viral video," Alistair mused, "it felt like a disaster. They tried to turn you into a caricature, a hero, a fraud, A pawn. I know, Ellie said softly, watching a family leave a newly opened coffee shop. They missed the point entirely. He continued, a sense of clarity in his voice. The important thing wasn't what happened in that diner. It was always about what happened after. The real story was never the one that trended online. It was the quiet work, the difficult conversations, and the second chances being forged in the heart of a forgotten town. A moment of violence had improbably birthed a movement of healing, and for Ellie and Alistair it was just the beginning. The story of Eleanor Vance and Alistair Finch reminds us that our true character isn't defined by the titles we hold or the money we have, but by how we react when the world is stripped down to a moment of crisis. A single act of profound calm in a forgotten diner didn't just save lives, it rebuilt them, creating ripples that would heal a community. It proves that one person's integrity can awaken another's humanity, and that the most powerful investments are the ones we make in each other. Their journey started with a viral video, but it ended with quiet, meaningful change that will never make the headlines. If this story of courage, compassion, and second chances moved you, please help us share it with the world. Hit that like button, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire. And don't forget to comment below. What did you find most powerful about Eleanor's calm leadership?